"You need to shut this down. Now," Valerie Brandt said, arms folded, lips curved into that smug little smile she wore like armor. She stood at the edge of my lawn like she owned the whole damn street, like my daughter's laughter was some violation of her perfect little world. Unapproved structures, unauthorized gathering, noise complaints. This isn't a public park, Jason. I didn't flinch. That bounce house you're so upset about? I glanced back toward the backyard where my daughter's 6th birthday party was still going. Barefoot kids squealing, balloons twisting in the breeze. It's on my own property, paid for in full, and the emergency dispatch line is logging this as a domestic disturbance, which means every word you say now gets captured on their dispatch audit feed. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I took a step toward her, slow and deliberate. You can throw citations at me all day, Valerie, but I write forensic recovery software for law enforcement. I design data trails so clean even body cams follow my breadcrumb code. So if you've got some brilliant plan brewing behind that pearl necklace, I'd think twice. She faltered. For just a second, her eyes twitched toward the curb where the sheriff's car idled. Name's Jason Marrow, widowed dad, cybersecurity architect. Moved here 2 years ago because my late wife wanted Lila to grow up with trees and sidewalks. I honored that dream, and I've honored it every day since she passed, planting that oak behind the house where her ashes were scattered, watching it grow beside our daughter. That tree is her memory, that yard is her voice, and this party? It's the first time Lila's smiled without flinching in 18 months. So, when Valerie Brandt called in a fake emergency dispatch claiming strange equipment and possible public endangerment, she didn't just cross a line, she buried it. Where are you watching from? Because from where I stand, I can already see what she's trying to erase, and I'm going to make sure the whole damn city watches it too. The first thing I felt was the thump of boots on soil, the zip of a tactical vest beside my grill. Then came the sharp yell from one officer to another, confirming nothing was found, no danger detected. Just a few kids, a cake, and one stunned father who had to shield his daughter as men with rifles stalked his backyard because someone weaponized the word non-compliance. I told the lead officer to review the call details. He said it wasn't his job. I told him I'd be filing a Freedom of Information request by morning. That was his job. Valerie stood at the end of the driveway, watching it all, not smug anymore, cold, calculating, like she'd expected panic, like she wanted chaos to follow me home. But that's the thing about people like Valerie. They only understand power in the moment it's used against them. She didn't see the storm coming because I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I recorded everything. I'm not here to burn down the HOA or scream about rules. I understand structure. I understand order. What I don't tolerate is abuse hiding behind policy. And now, Valerie's going to learn exactly how much damage a forensic tech dad can do when someone turns his daughter's birthday into a tactical drill. There's a difference between power and control. Valerie thinks she has the first because she's held on to the second for too long. But she's never met someone like me, someone who knows how to trace every digital step, who builds data systems the city uses without knowing my name. I don't need her approval. I just need the right code and the right timestamp. That footage, that radio dispatch, the back-end metadata stringing it all together, it's already moving. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Because the moment she weaponized law enforcement for HOA pride, she lost control. And she has no idea yet what I'm about to do with the footage. By the next morning, the HOA violation notice was already duct taped to my front door, crisp, white, and smug. It was stamped, "Urgent response required," in red block letters, like a utility shutoff. Valerie didn't waste time. She made sure the entire board saw it too, carbon copied to 5 members I'd never even met. But I knew the real message wasn't on that paper. It was in the silence that followed. No apology. No explanation for why Swat had entered my backyard while toddlers were mid-cupcake. This wasn't her first power play. A few neighbors walked by that day, eyes down, quick nods, one woman muttering, "That was insane. I'm sorry." But no one lingered. Not on my porch, not near the oak, not with Valerie watching from her picture-perfect veranda 2 houses down. It wasn't the first time she'd pulled something like this. 2 months earlier, I installed a swing set for Lila. Simple, low-profile, ADA compliant with a belt harness and padded seat. The next morning, I found a violation tag zip-tied to it. Non-approved structure must be removed. No safety concern, no architectural clash, just unapproved. I'd filed an appeal, never heard back. I asked a neighbor, Sam, about it. He shook his head. Valerie hates anything that looks different, he said, voice low. She even made the Khans remove their raised garden bed. And the irony, I'd moved here because I wanted Lila to be part of a community. Streets felt safe, houses looked cared for. It was the kind of place my wife dreamed about. But I was beginning to understand something. When the HOA is run by someone who sees difference as threat, beauty becomes control. The pattern started coming into focus. Noise. Complaints during the roof install, despite the fact it was during posted work hours. A fine for my solar technician's van parked outside for 2 hours. A warning because my trash bins were out 15 minutes early on pickup day. Each one subtle, petty, but together, a pattern. I wasn't just being watched, I was being tested. And Valerie's real game wasn't about order. It was about submission. Lila asked me that night, "Are we bad for having a party?" I crouched beside her bed, brushed her hair back. "No, sweetheart, not even a little." But the men with the big vests came, and you looked scared. That part broke me. I was scared, not of Swat, of what this kind of fear could do to her. The world already took her mom. I wasn't going to let it take her joy too. That's when I knew. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to end this pattern for good. Valerie had used this HOA like a weapon for too long, and people had let her. Not because they agreed, but because they didn't want to be next. That's why no one stopped her at the meeting when she motioned to have the swing removed. That's why people whispered but never signed my appeal. Fear. That's what she fed on. And the only thing that ever shuts fear down is proof. You give people something undeniable, and suddenly the silence breaks. That was the strategy forming in the back of my mind. Quiet, methodical, just like the systems I build. Find the flaws in her story, extract the records, expose the truth. Not just to the HOA board, to everyone. But first, I had to gather data the right way. No shortcuts, no missteps. That's what Valerie counted on, that no one would take the time to go through the process. She assumed I'd rage and rant and give her more ammo. But I've written tools that map metadata across 300 agencies. I can trace a server log chain from a dispatch line to a city compliance archive blindfolded. And what Valerie didn't know? Body cams don't just record what's in front of them. They timestamp every single movement. That's where I'd start. Drop a like if you've ever had to deal with rules that weren't about fairness, but about control. This isn't just about my house anymore. This is about every neighbor she's bullied into silence. And if you think that swing set's coming back, you're damn right it is. The next HOA board meeting was held in the clubhouse on Birch Hollow Lane, a space that looked more like a country club foyer than a neighborhood gathering spot. Neutral walls, crown molding, fake fireplace always on low. Every chair had been wiped down twice, probably by Valerie herself. I walked in 5 minutes early. She was already seated at the center table like a judge behind her bench, clipboard in hand. 2 other board members scrolled their phones, checked the clock. But it was Dan Reyes, HOA treasurer and part-time EMT, who caught my attention. He didn't look at me when I entered, just adjusted his collar, rubbed his temple like he had a migraine that wouldn't quit. I watched his knee bounce under the table. Not nerves, guilt. Valerie opened the meeting with a plastic smile. "Let's keep this quick. Mr. Merrow, you're here to address your ongoing violations?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at Dan. He glanced up, then looked away. "The bounce house," I said. "The swing set. The solar tech van. I'm noticing a pattern." Valerie leaned back. "If you're suggesting bias, I assure you, I'm suggesting abuse of authority," I interrupted. A couple of the board members stirred. The air went stiff. Dan cleared his throat, but when Valerie shot him a look, he froze mid-sentence. She called in a fake emergency to get police on my lawn, I continued, voice level. Claimed possible public danger. That's not in your enforcement guidelines. That's a lie. Valerie narrowed her eyes. You're accusing the HOA of misconduct? I'm accusing you, I said. Dan shifted again. He wasn't breathing right. His shoulders were too tight, and his hands weren't resting on the table. They were gripping the edge, knuckles white. I reviewed the county's emergency dispatch archive. The caller didn't identify as a neighbor. She used the HOA's central line. That got a reaction. One of the board members looked up for the first time. And unless the board authorized that call, I added, that's a personal action taken under the guise of HOA authority. I turned back to Dan. Did the board vote to approve that call, Mr. Reyes? Dan blinked, swallowed. His fingers curled into his palm. Valerie cut in smoothly. Our treasurer does not speak for enforcement. If you have documentation to share, we'll review it through the formal grievance process. No, I said, because the process is designed to go nowhere. I already filed an appeal on the swing set. It was ignored. Dan shifted again. Then he finally spoke. Jason's right. Valerie's head snapped toward him. I mean, Dan's voice cracked. We didn't vote. She made the call alone. It was quiet for a beat too long. I told her it was excessive, he added, barely louder than a whisper. But she said we had to set the tone early. You could feel the tension ripple through the room like a dropped glass. Valerie looked like she'd swallowed a mouthful of vinegar. You're out of line. Dan didn't answer. His body betrayed what he couldn't say out loud, the tremor in his fingers, the sudden need to blink too much. Shame lives in the quiet. I stood straighter. Thanks, Dan. That's all I needed. I walked out of the clubhouse before she could speak again. The meeting didn't end right away, but something else did. The illusion, the silence. Dan didn't have to spell out everything. I knew the signs. I'd worked with whistleblowers. Sometimes the most you'll get is a single crack in the wall, but that's all you need to let the light in. That night, I sat in my backyard under the oak, laptop open, Lila asleep upstairs. I reviewed my footage again, not just the dispatch audio or the body cam files, but the metadata from the call logs. Dan had just given me what I needed to move to the next phase. Someone inside the system knew it was wrong. That was leverage. And Valerie? She just lost the ability to say it was procedural. Drop a like if you've ever seen someone finally speak up, even when it wasn't easy. It might not seem like much, but sometimes the smallest confession is the biggest crack in the dam. The letter came the next morning, not by mail, but by hand, folded once, slipped between my screen door and the frame like a whisper no one wanted to hear out loud. Notice of escalating violations. Final warning. Valerie's name wasn't signed at the bottom, but the letterhead said it all. Creststone Lakeside HOA Enforcement Division. Formal now, not just a swing set or a party. This time, they cited me for failure to remediate prior offenses, non-cooperative behavior during a compliance investigation, and the most ridiculous line of all, hostile posture toward board members. I laughed when I read that one. Hostile posture for showing up with facts, but the fine wasn't funny. $1,750, due in 10 days. And the line just beneath it, further disregard may result in referral to external legal or municipal channels for enforcement. She was trying to bury me in process, stack violation on top of violation, until it looked like I was the problem. Because once you're labeled non-compliant, they don't have to justify anything anymore. They just escalate. The bounce house was gone, the party was over. There hadn't been a single incident since. But Valerie needed the war to keep going, needed to make an example out of me before her grip slipped, and she wanted me to react. So I didn't. Instead, I walked 3 blocks over to the community greenbelt where no one cared about HOA lines or playground structure colors. It was quiet there, real quiet. I sat down on a bench under a line of whispering sycamores and opened my laptop. Time to get ahead of her. I already had Dan's partial admission. And I had the metadata trail. Now I needed the next piece, intent. I checked the city's public meeting calendar. 2 months ago, Valerie had spoken during a zoning variance hearing, pushing back against a planned daycare center near the neighborhood's east entrance. Her reason? Unsupervised gatherings increase property wear and introduce liability. She hated kids, or maybe just hated anything she couldn't schedule and sterilize. I filed another FOIA request, this one for dispatch communications linked to our HOA number. Not just the day of the birthday party, but the entire past 6 months. If she'd used that line before, I'd find it, and I'd trace it, because it wasn't enough to show what happened to me. I had to show it was part of a pattern she'd weaponized, against me, against the cons, against anyone who didn't fold. But while I waited on the city's response, I needed to buy time. 10 days wasn't long. That's when I remembered something. Years ago, when I built compliance models for local police departments, I learned how to parse vague policy statements through AI-assisted regulatory scanners. It was dry work, text matching, behavioral thresholds, audit triggers. But it taught me how to read bureaucracy like a code base. And this letter from Valerie, it referenced enforcement bylaws that no longer existed. She'd copied text from the old HOA handbook, one that had been replaced during last year's revision. The new language softened several penalties, reclassified gatherings under temporary personal events, and stripped the board of unilateral authority in escalation cases. I pulled up the PDF from the HOA site's bylaws archive. Yep. Page 9, Section 4. C. Events of fewer than 25 persons held on private property shall not be subject to HOA approval, provided there is no financial transaction involved. No permit needed, no approval, just a party in a backyard. Exactly what Lila had, exactly what Valerie had ignored. That was my shield. She didn't just overstep, she enforced a rule that no longer existed. Drop a like if you've ever had someone bluff with authority, only to realize they didn't read the fine print. This isn't about just fighting back. It's about knowing the rules better than the people who write them. I took screenshots, highlighted sections, dated both documents. If Valerie wanted to drag this into legal threats, I'd let her. I was building something better than a defense. I was building a collapse. And the first beam just cracked. The city's records portal pinged my inbox just after midnight. Subject, FOIA request, fulfilled. Dispatch records, Creststone HOA line. I was half asleep on the couch, Lila tucked upstairs, when I saw it. My hands moved before I could think. Click, download, extract. Inside, 2 months worth of 911 audio logs, dispatch call sheets, and body cam reference indexes, all linked to the HOA's official phone line. Valerie had called in 3 separate emergency claims in the past 8 weeks. 3, all listed under Anonymous, HOA tip, community safety concern. The earliest one was from April. A supposed unauthorized construction site in a neighbor's garage turned out to be a family building bunk beds for foster kids. No fines were issued, but the visit alone made them pack up and leave a week later. The second was worse. The cons again. A prayer gathering during Ramadan, 20 guests in their backyard. Valerie had filed it as a potential security risk, foreign language shouting and unknown individuals. I read that line 3 times before my hands clenched around the trackpad. She hadn't just abused her position. She'd profiled, harassed, weaponized law enforcement under the shield of the HOA's legitimacy. I opened the body cam logs. They were mostly motion-triggered thumbnails, but I recognized the pattern. Timestamp, officer ID, location match. Then I found mine. Event ID 507-AQ4 caller. Source Creststone HOA. Official line reported concern. Possible unpermitted gathering, suspicious equipment, unknown electrical devices. Electrical devices? She'd meant the bubble machine and the portable speaker I rigged to run off an inverter so the kids could dance in the grass. But here's the kicker. In the audio log, the dispatcher asks, "Do you represent law enforcement, or is this a civilian report?" And she replies, "This is Creststone Security, HOA internal enforcement, just documenting an escalating risk. Creststone Security doesn't exist. There's no private enforcement arm, just a board, a landscaping contract, and a rotating pool guy. She fabricated an agency to escalate priority. That one sentence changed everything. If you tell a dispatcher you're civilian, it goes in queue. If you claim you're part of a private enforcement entity or management authority, it triggers immediate routing to municipal response. Valerie didn't just lie. She manipulated dispatch protocol to deploy an armed response. Drop a like if you've ever been stunned at how far someone will go just to maintain control. Because I wasn't just staring at abuse of power. I was looking at tactical fraud. I copied the audio, ran it through my waveform visualizer, spliced a clip, her voice, that phrase, the timestamp, synced it with the body cam title frame where SWAT enters my gate, rifles up, safety off. Then I added one more overlay. The clause from the HOA charter stating no board member may impersonate or claim alignment with a municipal authority. I sat there in my office, palms flat on the desk. This was it. I finally had the connection between the lie and the real-world consequence. Not just my daughter's trauma, not just community harm, but an actual regulatory violation punishable under civil impersonation codes. And if I played it right, it wouldn't just be her name on the line. The HOA's entire liability policy would be implicated. Because if she acted under their name without approval and they failed to correct it, they inherit the exposure. I sent the audio to a friend from a cybersecurity symposium, Claire. She worked for a local media outlet now and owed me a favor. She wouldn't run it yet, but she'd verify the chain. And once it was verified, that video would move from proof to evidence. I closed the file and sat in the dark for a moment. Outside, the oak tree rustled, late spring wind tugging at the leaves. My wife had planted it when Lila was born, said it would grow alongside her, root deep, reach high. I owed her this. I wasn't just fighting a HOA president anymore. I was about to pull the curtain back on a system that let people like Valerie play God with the truth and get away with it. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, from focus. That audio clip, Valerie impersonating Creststone Security, kept replaying in my head. Each time I heard it, the consequences multiplied. This wasn't just about a lie. It was an engineered misuse of emergency services, layered in just enough pseudo-authority to evade suspicion. And my daughter was the collateral. Lila had a session with her therapist that morning. We drove in silence most of the way until she asked, "Are they going to come again?" It took me a second to answer. "No, sweetheart, they're not." But that wasn't a promise. It was a decision. One I'd already made. After dropping her off, I sat in the waiting room, laptop balanced on my knees. The therapist's office was calm, muted colors, a diffuser humming in the corner, classical piano on low. I needed the quiet, because what I was about to do required clarity. The first step? Consult an expert. Not legal, yet. I needed to know if my claim actually aligned with impersonation of authority statutes. I reached out to Andre Jenkins, a former municipal emergency coordinator I'd met at a cyber risk summit 3 years back. We weren't friends exactly, but he respected precision, and right now, that's what I was offering. I texted him, hypothetical. Civilian falsely claims to be part of a private security enforcement arm in a 911 call to prioritize response. Could that trigger legal scrutiny under impersonation or abuse of service policy? He replied 5 minutes later. Absolutely, especially if it results in escalated deployment. Show me the call log. I sent the clip. No edits, no preamble. 20 minutes later, he called. "You're not wrong," he said. "She identified a non-existent agency. That's a big deal. Could the HOA be liable? If she used HOA resources, logo, phone line, even implied representation, and the board didn't authorize or distance themselves afterward, yes. And they'd better have liability coverage because this could trigger a review by the Municipal Oversight Committee." I exhaled, not because I was relieved, but because the picture was locking into place. All the small moves I'd made so far, Dan's quiet admission, the swing set appeal, the flawed violation letter, they were chess openings. Now I was threatening her queen. Valerie didn't know it yet, but she'd built her empire on the assumption that no one would push back hard enough. That fear would keep people silent. But I wasn't afraid because I wasn't just building a case. I was building a spotlight. And all I needed now was the right time to flip the switch. I picked up Lila after her session. Her therapist handed me a short note, 3 bullet points outlining symptoms of acute startle response, minor regression in night independence, and signs of environmental trauma. That paper wasn't just a summary, it was evidence. It was the emotional cost of what Valerie had done. As we walked to the car, Lila pointed to the oak tree mural painted on the side of the building. "That one's smaller than ours," she said. I smiled. "Yeah, but it's still growing." She nodded. "Like Mommy's tree." That's when I knew this wasn't just about proving Valerie wrong or knocking her off the board. It was about reclaiming the space where my daughter could grow again, laugh again, live without fear. And that meant I had to go all in. No half measures, no soft confrontations. Drop a like if you've ever realized that protecting your peace means choosing the fight. Because today, I made that choice. I wasn't waiting for Valerie to push further. I was going to expose her. And when I did, I wouldn't just restore my family's name. I'd make sure every single neighbor she intimidated knew that they were never the problem. She was. And I was about to make sure the whole damn city saw it. Dan showed up at my doorstep just after 10 p.m., looking like he'd aged 5 years since the last board meeting. He didn't ring the bell, just stood there, hands in his hoodie pockets, shifting on his heels like he was still deciding whether to knock. I opened the door before he could. "You got a minute?" he asked. I stepped aside. "Yeah, come in." We sat on the back patio, under the soft hum of the porch light and the deeper rustle of the oak tree behind us. Lila was asleep. The wind was calm. It was the first quiet moment I'd had in days. Dan didn't speak right away. He stared out at the lawn like he was watching a ghost walk through it. "She's out of control," he finally said. I thought if I stayed quiet, it'd level out. That maybe Valerie would just ride out her ego and move on to the next project. But this, Jason, I was there. I heard the call go out. SWAT for a bounce house. He shook his head, jaw clenched. "I know," I said. "That's why I need your help." He looked at me then. Really looked. Not as a neighbor, but as a man deciding whether this was the moment he stopped being complicit. "I didn't know about the other calls," I continued. "But I do now. The one about the prayer gathering, the unauthorized construction site. She's been using the HOA line to fabricate emergencies and paint them as community threats." Dan's face went pale. "She never told us those were fake, said she was working with neighborhood compliance liaisons. I didn't even know that wasn't a real department." "It's not," I said. "But what matters now is whether the board approved any of those actions." Dan paused. "Never? Not once?" I leaned forward. "Then I need your signature, or a statement, something confirming Valerie acted independently while claiming board authority." His knees started bouncing. "If I sign that, she'll come after me, not if I go public first," I said. "This isn't just about one bad call. It's about systemic abuse wrapped in authority. You put your name next to mine, and I'll make sure the story moves fast enough that she won't get a chance to spin it." He hesitated, then asked, "What are you planning?" I pulled out the tablet from my chairside table. Opened the draft folder. There it was, the clip of Valerie claiming to be Creststone Security, overlaid with the body cam footage and the HOA bylaw quote stating no board member may impersonate a municipal or enforcement entity. Dan watched it once, then again. When it ended, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. "You already built the bomb," he said quietly. "I just need the fuse," I replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I wrote this the night after the raid, just in case." He handed it to me, half confession, half statement, typed, signed, dated. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but now, yeah, you can use it. I read it once, then twice. It detailed Valerie's solo actions, her refusal to consult the board, her fabricated justifications. It was everything I needed to verify her abuse wasn't just personal. It was unauthorized. "I'll redact your address and personal info," I said. Dan nodded. "I appreciate that." We sat in silence for a few minutes. The oak tree swayed above us. "You know," he said, "your wife was the one who got me to join the board, said I'd be the first honest treasurer this place had seen." I blinked. She never told me that. "She said it during the Halloween cookout, right over there by that tree." He pointed at the patch of lawn where we'd once set up folding chairs and watched our kids run in the dark with glow sticks. "She believed in people doing the right thing," I said. He nodded. "That's why I'm here now. Drop a like if you've ever needed one person, just one, to stand beside you so the whole thing doesn't feel impossible. Tonight, I didn't just get a signature. I got a spine to lean on. And now, Valerie's lies have a witness. This story's about to go wide. By sunrise, I was already at the co-working space I rented twice a week downtown. One of those quiet, window-lined floors overlooking the canal. All glass walls and coffee machines that brewed like they belonged in a spaceship. I brought only what mattered, the USB drive with Dan's statement, the dispatch audio from Valerie's call, the 3 Swat body cam clips, and the HOA charter PDF with the impersonation clause highlighted. This wasn't about collecting pieces anymore. This was about orchestration. I wasn't building a defense. I was constructing a digital narrative, something irrefutable, something even a HOA board couldn't spin with their usual legal tap dance. First, I opened a new timeline editor, left to right. April 9th. Valerie's call about the prayer gathering, May 2nd. Construction site, false report, June 17th. Lila's birthday party, SWAT call, under each. Dispatch audio quotes, HOA line logs, and corresponding body cam IDs. Under that, Valerie's voice, same cadence every time, slightly formal, just enough authority to slide past doubt. Then I dropped Dan's signed statement in the lower quadrant of the screen, his name blurred but dated and signed. Over that, I layered text boxes. No board approval, multiple false claims, children present. I paused there, because this wasn't just about weaponized policy anymore. This was emotional warfare, kids being caught in the crossfire, neighbors bullied, cultural targeting, and every piece of it had a digital footprint. Drop a like if you've ever seen power being misused not because someone needed it, but because they were terrified of losing control. That's what Valerie was doing. Grasping for control she no longer had. I added a section at the end titled Policy Versus Reality. On one side, Creststone's official bylaws. No impersonation, no emergency calls without verification, no unilateral enforcement. On the other, audio of Valerie calling herself Creststone Security, a term that doesn't exist in any HOA document. That phrase alone gave me the legal weight I needed. But what would give the public emotional clarity? That's where Lila came in. I wasn't going to show her face, not even a photo. But I added a simple clip from my home security cam, the bounce house in the backyard, kids laughing, balloons, that quiet joy before the raid. Then I faded in the radio chatter from the SWAT team moments before entry. Approach perimeter, suspect activity unconfirmed, maintain readiness. I ended it with a black screen, just 2 lines of text. This was my daughter's birthday. This is what fear looks like when it wears a badge of authority. Then I saved the draft. Next, I wrote the cover email. To Claire, my media contact. Subject, HOA weaponized law enforcement. Audio plus witness plus policy violation. Claire, this story isn't just personal anymore. It's systemic. Attached are time-coded clips, a redacted witness statement, and confirmed audio impersonation tied to an HOA board member. Valerie Brandt used the HOA line to trigger a SWAT deployment on a 6-year-old's birthday. We now have metadata proof and internal confirmation it was unauthorized. If you want the exclusive, it's yours. But I'm publishing with or without press. Jason, I hit send. Then I uploaded the edited video to a private YouTube link, set to unlisted for now, just long enough to let Claire verify the source chain and prep her outlet. Then I called Dan. She's not going to see this coming, I said. She won't be the only one, he replied. Some of the board's already nervous. Your email's making the rounds. Good. Let them sweat, because now the footage was packaged, the statement confirmed, the violations mapped and traceable. Valerie Brandt didn't just make a mistake. She built her power on a fraud. And I was about to give that lie a digital postmark, time-stamped, sourced, and ready for the public eye. The moment I published the video, I set a timer, 12 hours. That's how long I gave it to start catching fire before I initiated the second phase. I titled it plainly, HOA President Falsely Called SWAT on Child's Birthday. Watch what really happened. No clickbait, no dramatics, just the facts. Because the footage spoke for itself. Valerie's voice. Swat entering my backyard. Lila's bubble machine spinning in the background while armed men fanned out behind a jungle gym. Then, the overlays. Dan's statement. The quote from the bylaws. The footage fading to black, and that final line. This was my daughter's birthday. I sent the link to a few neighbors, quietly. The ones who'd pulled me aside over the months, the cons. Sam from across the street. Janice, whose flower beds were cited for aesthetic inconsistency 2 weeks after she declined to join Valerie's community subcommittee. By hour 3, the views were climbing, 500, then 8, 100 comments in. By hour 5, Claire emailed me back. Subject line, running it. Full segment. Local anchor wants a live read. She'd confirmed the clip. Cross-referenced the audio, matched Dan's statement with county board documentation. Don't take it down, she wrote. We're mirroring it across affiliate sites. Your story airs at 6. I stared at that line for a minute. It was happening. Still, I wasn't done. Because while public outrage builds pressure, consequences require structure. So I printed the body cam transcripts. The HOA bylaw clause, Dan's statement, Valerie's own violation letters. I compiled them into a binder with dividers, color-coded like an evidence docket. I wasn't just preparing for a PR storm. I was preparing for a legal audit. Then I walked to the HOA mailbox cluster, the same one where Valerie had once posted laminated reminders about acceptable mailbox decor. I taped a flyer to the side. Simple. HOA emergency abuse. See for yourself. Watch what happened at video link. Bylaw reference. Page 9, Section 4. See meeting next Thursday. Demand accountability. Within an hour, it was posted to the Creststone Community Facebook group. Not by me, by Sam. By sundown, 3 more neighbors reshared it with captions like, "Wait, this is what happened? Explains why the police were here that day." This makes me sick. Someone tagged Valerie. She didn't reply. At 6:04 p.m., the local station ran the story. Anchor led, Claire's voice narrating, what began as a 6-year-old's birthday party ended in a fully armed tactical response, triggered by a false emergency call made by an HOA president impersonating a security authority. I didn't move, as it played on my screen, just sat still, listening to the clip echo through my office like it wasn't my life being broadcast, but a case study I'd stumbled across. Like this was someone else's trauma, but it wasn't. It was mine. And now it belonged to the public, too. Lila came in after the segment ended, holding her stuffed owl. "Daddy," she whispered, "did we win?" I looked at her, blinked hard, and nodded. "We're getting there," I said. Then I hugged her like I never wanted to let go. Drop a like if you've ever had to turn pain into proof, because sometimes that's the only way the world listens. And now that it was listening, I wasn't going to let it forget. Not until the board saw the video. Not until Valerie had to answer for every minute of footage. Not until that oak tree outside stood tall without a shadow hanging over it. By morning, the video had passed 50,000 views. It wasn't just Creststone anymore. Local parenting groups had picked it up. A fire safety forum reposted it under Misuse of Emergency Resources, Case Study, and one legal subreddit had the title trending, HOA President Fakes Security Authority, Calls SWAT, Gets Exposed on Tape. Valerie hadn't responded publicly, but the HOA board had. An emergency meeting was called for that evening, open to all residents, mandatory for board members. The agenda read like someone had panicked while trying to sound calm. 1. Community clarification regarding recent media. Incident 2. Policy review, emergency protocol, and board procedure. 3. Resident concerns and public comment period. They didn't name me directly, but they didn't have to. The meeting was held in the Creststone Lakeside Clubhouse, same spot as always. But this time, it wasn't quiet. The line stretched past the doors before sunset. People held printed versions of the bylaws. One guy had a tablet open, already queued to the video. Another woman clutched a printout of her own violation notice, dated 2 years back, but with a familiar name at the bottom. Valerie Brandt. I walked in with Dan at my side. He looked steadier than he had all week, not calm, but committed. The room hushed the second we stepped through the doors. Valerie was already at the board table. She wore a gray blazer, lipstick slightly off, hair tighter than usual. But her face, her eyes, betrayed it. The control was cracking. The board president, a man named Greg, who normally deferred to her on everything, opened the meeting. We're here to address serious concerns raised in the past 48 hours regarding HOA leadership actions and possible misuse of board authority. Valerie's smile twitched. Let's keep this civil. I raised my hand. Civility ended when you called Swat on a child's birthday and lied about who you were. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Greg cleared his throat but didn't stop me. I stepped forward, binder in hand. I'd like to formally present evidence that Ms. Brandt used the HOA's phone line to file 3 false emergency reports in the last 2 months, none of which were board approved. I have dispatch transcripts, SWAT body cam footage, a signed witness statement from Treasurer Reyes, and a full bylaw comparison proving she violated HOA policy and municipal impersonation guidelines. Dan stepped beside me and nodded. I confirm what Jason said. The board never approved any of it. Valerie stood up suddenly. That's hearsay. You're manipulating context. The community asked me to maintain safety, and No one asked you to impersonate law enforcement, I cut in, and you called yourself Creststone Security, which does not exist. I tapped the tablet screen and played 10 seconds of the dispatch call on speaker. Valerie's voice rang out. This is Creststone Security, HOA, Internal Enforcement. Then the video of officers breaching my yard, flash frame of Lila ducking behind me as the men swept the grass. People in the crowd gasped. One woman whispered, "That's his daughter." I looked back at the board. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. And you all enabled it by staying silent. Greg looked rattled. Ms. Brandt, did you identify yourself as part of a security organization? I was trying to get attention to a possible issue. The terminology was intentional, I said. Dan handed Greg the binder. There's more, he said. Her violation notices were issued with outdated enforcement clauses. She used obsolete policy to justify penalties that no longer apply. Greg opened the binder, scanning silently. Given the public exposure and legal risk, I said, I recommend immediate removal of Ms. Brandt pending review, and a vote of censure for abuse of power. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, but this time no one was listening. Neighbors stood, one after another. I got cited for painting my fence beige. She told my wife our Ramadan gathering was un-American. She fined me for a bird bath. Voices rising, truth spilling. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone's lies collapse under the weight of truth. And stay tuned, because this confrontation is only the beginning of what justice looks like. Valerie sat back down. She didn't say another word. The room had never been this silent. Valerie sat stiff in her chair as the final resident finished speaking, an older woman named Marcia, who'd been fined twice in one summer for planting daisies, not in compliance with HOA-approved seasonal color schemes. Her voice cracked when she said, I used to think it was just me, but it's all of us, isn't it? That silence afterward, it was heavier than anger. It was recognition. A shift. Greg, the HOA board president, cleared his throat. His hands shook slightly as he flipped through the binder Dan and I had handed over. I watched his eyes dart to the body cam transcript, to the section marked Impersonation of Security Personnel, Civilian Reporting Override Activated. He looked up at Valerie. Do you deny this call came from your voice, Valerie? He asked, quiet, measured. She didn't answer. Her jaw flexed. Her fingers fidgeted with a silver pen in front of her, her last tool of control. That pen had signed every violation in this room. I knew it. They knew it. Dan stepped forward beside me, clearing his throat. Greg, I'm invoking Section 12D of the HOA Charter, Emergency Board Vote for Suspension of Officer Duties, based on confirmed abuse of authority and reputational risk to the association. Greg nodded, almost gratefully. Seconded. All in favor, he said, raising his hand. One, then another. Then every single board member, except Valerie, raised their hands. Valerie looked around like someone had pulled the floor out from beneath her. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. You're hereby suspended from all Creststone HOA duties pending further review, Greg said, effective immediately. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The power had already shifted. Valerie stood slowly, picked up her pen, and, without a word, walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Final, hollow. A pause. Then Greg turned back to the crowd. "We'll be reviewing all violations issued over the past 12 months, he said. "Effective this week, enforcement is frozen. All fines are suspended pending audit." A few gasps. One man clapped once reflexively, but most people just stood there, letting it settle. After the meeting, neighbors came up to me in waves. Soft thanks, quiet nods. Even the con stopped me outside the clubhouse and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand, an invitation to dinner. Dan walked beside me toward the lot, his voice low. "You think she'll sue?" "She can try," I said. "But her voice is already archived in 3 places. Her name's attached to every call. And this community, it just watched the tape." He nodded. "You did something big, Jason." I shook my head. "We did." Drop a like if you've ever watched silence turn into truth, and truth turn into change. That night wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something bigger than property lines. Back home, I tucked Lila in beneath her sunflower blanket. She looked up at me, eyes wide and sleepy. "Did the mean lady go away?" "Yeah," I whispered, brushing her hair back. "She's not in charge anymore." She smiled and rolled over, hugging her owl tight. Then I stepped outside. The backyard was still. The oak tree swayed gently above me, summer air warm and sweet. A single paper lantern still hung from one of the branches, left over from the party that got broken by fear. But it was still here, just like us. And for the first time in months, I stood in that yard and didn't feel watched. I felt free. 1 week later, I stood beneath the oak tree with a plaque in my hand. Lila helped me pick it out. She chose the words. We engraved them together. "This is where I turned 6. This is where Daddy stood his ground." I knelt and fastened it to the base of the tree, right where her swing touched the soil when it slowed to a stop. The same spot Valerie had once called an unapproved play area. The same spot the SWAT team had swept with rifles drawn. Not anymore. The board finalized the decision 2 days after the vote. Valerie Brandt was officially removed. All outstanding fines against my property were voided, and a public letter was issued to the community. The HOA deeply regrets any distress caused by recent enforcement actions taken without authorization. We reaffirm our commitment to lawful, ethical service to all residents. It didn't say her name. It didn't have to. The story had already moved beyond Creststone. The video had passed 300,000 views. 2 local stations ran follow-ups. Claire's segment aired again with a new title. Digital Dad Turns HOA Misconduct into Accountability Model. Dan and I were invited to speak at the next community forum. He wore a real smile this time, said he felt like he'd finally done what my wife had hoped he would. The day after, the cons hosted that dinner they promised. Their daughter gave Lila a painted rock that said, "Our yard, our rules." She keeps it by her bed now. Some folks in the neighborhood still avoid me. They don't say it, but I know what they're thinking. You broke the unspoken rule. Don't challenge power. Don't make noise. But here's the thing about rules like that. They're not rules. They're just walls we forget we can walk around. This story started because someone abused silence. Valerie counted on people being too scared or too tired to push back. And honestly, I almost didn't. But when my daughter flinched at the sound of boots on gravel, when she asked if she did something wrong by having a birthday, that was it. That was the moment I realized I didn't need to be louder. I just needed to be right, with proof. And that's what brought the whole thing down. Drop a like if you've ever faced a system that made you feel small, and hit subscribe if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny. Because there are more of us out there, more oaks that need protecting, more kids who deserve to swing in peace. Let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever taken on a board, a bully, or a bureaucrat. I read every story. As for Lila, she's planning her next birthday already. She wants to hang a string of lanterns from the tree and invite the neighbors who helped. No bounce house this time, just music, lemonade, and maybe a few sunflowers for her mom. And this time, the only thing watching from the fence line will be the wind.